Couple announcements really quick. So on Thursday, we're gonna do a practice test. It'll be paper because I don't want everyone to be worried about the AP exam. So let's go figure notes out. Let's get going.
So we're not gonna be done with all the units.
We might not get to. We might not get to all of page 10. Sorry. I tried really hard.
Because of intervention.
Parts of the intervention, that takes away about 4 days. And that would have been enough. And then part of it was since I had a week off and that lost a couple days for me. Yeah, I would have been fine without intervention. I wouldn't have made it probably pretty easy. I tried. So there might be a few things in the bottom of page 10 we don't get to. So you have to get it yourself.
Yes.
Or maybe I'll figure something out where you can ask. Okay? Maybe I'll take one lunch real quick and go over the ones I don't get. And I'm sorry, I tried. I blame society. I blame man's humanity to man. So we will do a paper practice test, multiple choice in class, just because I don't trust AP classroom. And almost all of you got the test up. I've had a few people say they logged on time after time again. If you cannot get on AP classroom, finish that assignment I gave you Thursday, see me right after class. I'll give you a paper version of it. Not the same. And some people works just fine, but I've tried to get on and it spit me out.
On Thursday, will the practice test will just be multiple choice?
Yeah, just multiple minutes. And on Teams, I posted a website that has a bunch of practice multiple choice questions. It'll say practice multiple choice questions on it. And it's just a website you quick do it. It's really, it's just seeing how they do the questions, and it's a pretty good review. So I'll get as far as I can. We'll go from there. Where do we finish in here?
Science, NASA.
Oh, we got science and NASA right after, what was this? The Soviet satellite? Sputnik. We had Hungary. We had a lot of facts. So let's get to, so we're past Geneva, of course. We're Sputnik. This look right?
That's where we stop.
All right. So the thing was, it didn't feel like the Soviets were winning. The Soviets were winning. And, we had Hungary. I moved Hungary in here. We got Hungary and they, okay. Go to Budapest. They're still mad about that. First, Budapest is kind of in a fashion. That's another story. So the thing was, I wanted an arms control agreement. He wanted to come out as the peacemaker, and so did Khrushchev. And the plan was for a Paris Arms Summit in 1960, an arms control summit. Khrushchev even came to the United States. It was a big deal in 1959. He spoke at the UN, that's where he banged his shoe on the podium. But then he was supposed to go back. He stayed for 2 weeks and traveled across to the US. So here he is in a dairy farm in Wisconsin, Khrushchev. And one of my favorite pictures, there he is in Disneyland, the brand new Disneyland in Anaheim. I just find that hilarious, the head of the Soviet Union, not quite Stalin, but the head at Disneyland. And his trip to Helena was epic. He didn't go to Helena, but I always think that would be a great float in the Vigilante parade the day Khrushchev came to Helena. It would just confuse people, and that's worth it. But the big issue was this. Eisenhower was so confident about American superiority because the Americans were spying on the Soviets secretly and illegally in ways they could not. With a brand new spy plane called the U-2. Okay, U just meant utility, so it's kind of a diversion. It was basically like a big glider that could get to over 65,000 feet, fly for about 6,000 miles. Its cameras were so sensitive of that height, it could read license plate numbers. And they were flying all these illegal flights with the Soviet Union and over all their missile testing areas. And the US knew that the Soviets were way behind, but they couldn't tell anybody. The Soviets knew, and Khrushchev was furious about it. They could pick them up on radar, but Soviet air defenses couldn't quite reach him, even though every year, 56 on, they got closer and closer. It became more and more dangerous. Eisenhower agreed, no more U-2 flights. I should add, when these were flying over the deserts of Nevada, California, in test flights, Arizona, New Mexico, that would fit in with the UFO craze. All of a sudden, people started seeing flying saucers before they never saw them. All kind of part of it. I know it doesn't look like a flying saucer, but people see stuff. Eisenhower agreed, no more flights. And then the CIA said, one more flight. One more flight. Francis Gary Powers would fly his U-2 over Kazakhstan, and in 1960, he had some engine problems, and the Soviets were able to shoot it down. He somehow survived getting out of the plane. There was no ejector seat on the U-2. Dislocated his shoulders. At first, the U.S. claimed a weather plane got lost, the pilot stopped. The Soviets presented the wreckage and the pilot. You can see his shoulders, he dislocated his shoulder getting out. He was an egg in that picture. They actually they hadn't put the shoulder in until after that picture was taken. And the United States was humiliated. That's him out of bases in Iran, which kind of makes sense after the overthrowing the democracy in Iran. This infuriated Khrushchev, and the chance for peace talks ended. And both sides started testing more weapons than ever before. The Tsar bomb, that 50 megaton bomb, would be tested just a few months after Powers was shot down. Khrushchev was furious. And Ike's plan for peace and the peacemaker fell apart. He's really upset about this. And then something else was going on at the same time. A revolution in Cuba. The United States supported a brutal dictator by the name of Batista. He was so corrupt that the U.S. quit supporting him into the 50s. There's Batista on Time magazine on the right. A coalition of rebel groups basically led, even though it's more complex than that, by a young lawyer by the name of Fidel Castro. Batista allowed American organized crime in to build casinos. So that'd be like a playground for people, rich people from the East Coast go to Cuba. When Castro kicked him out, that's when Las Vegas went on this really big boom in the early 60s, when the mob went to build all those casinos. But back to this. The revolutionaries lost almost every battle. But then, literally, overnight, New Year's Eve, 1959, won the war. Just Batista's government collapsed. Little like Chiang Kai-shek's collapse to the Chinese back in 1949. So Castro won. There he is riding into Cuba. And what type of government is he? But remember I told you about land reform in Guatemala? When he suggested land reform, he's a communist. Is he a communist? Well, Richard Nixon, the vice president, met him and said, he is either a communist or completely indoctrinated with Marxist thought, whatever that meant. He actually appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, the same show that Elvis appeared on. There he is with his characteristic beard and the revolutionary garb, which he would wear for the rest of his life. Now, we don't know what type of government he would have been, but once this happened, the U.S. began an embargo, and he'd be followed by thousands of kids with beards. Okay, this was in New York City too, and I just thought this was kind of funny, seeing a bunch of kids dressed up as Castro. Now you get to see it too. But he'd come closer to the Soviet Union. So everyone got that? The U.S. would push him closer to the Soviet Union. I don't know. Who knows what he would have been? But he would soon become very much a dictator in a country that is under siege by the United States. And almost immediately, the Eisenhower administration had the CIA plan in operation. But it's 1960 and there's an election. So that's the situation going into the 60s. That is a picture of the Vietnam Memorial. A little blurry because I'm not, but I can't really tell that good, but still with a short picture. I would recommend going, even though it's going to be very controversial when it was made in the 80s. So, this is an election year. And the election of 1960 was one of the most important. Even though the country was more affluent than ever before, there was a small recession going on. The Democrats nominated a complete unknown junior senator from Massachusetts, John Kennedy. Kennedy came from an exceedingly wealthy family. Dad made money getting out of the stock market just before the crash. And he was a dark horse. He really didn't have a reputation at all, except for being kind of a playboy lightweight. So they could make up a reputation. But he needed the South. And so he asked, and surprisingly, Lyndon Johnson, LBJ, took the vice presidency, even though he was the Senate Majority Leader, the most powerful position after the president in Washington, D.C. at this time. Kennedy's program would be called the New Frontier. It's basically to finish the New Deal and the Fair Deal. He believes in liberal economics. He is definitely a New Dealer, definitely a Keynesian, but a Cold Warrior extraordinaire. He's a war hero. his patrol boat called PT-109 was rammed by a Japanese submarine. He broke his back, yet still saved his crew. So that's why you have PT-109. He was a really sick man. He had a horrible back. He had Addison's disease and probably other maladies. He had actually, in his lifetime, he will receive the last rites 3 times. Because 2 times they thought he was going to die. The last time he actually did die. He was on a cocktail of amphetamines, steroids, and barbiturates just to get through the day. Just to get through the day. But they hit it, and he looked fit and vigorous. He looked really healthy. He was really sick. Richard Nixon, the vice president, the hatchet man for Eisenhower, would be the presidential candidate. And even though he had a really bad reputation, he was, everyone acknowledged, incredibly smart, very knowledgeable. He had a reputation of a hard worker. He built a reputation in Congress. Controversial one, but he built it. And he looked at Kennedy like this lightweight playboy. Kennedy had somewhere around 10,000 extramarital affairs, maybe more. Probably, I think part of it is he always thought he was going to die tomorrow. So, yeah. Anyways, so he, that's why Kennedy was, really a bad reputation. But think about a dark horse. You can create an image from scratch, because most people don't pay attention. Well, the big thing the Democrats hit the Republicans on was the missile gap. Remember the bomber gap that Republicans hit Adlai Stevens on back in 52? It said that the Soviets had more ICBMs, which are intercontinental ballistic missiles. Missiles that could be fired from the Soviet Union and hit the United States over the Arctic Ocean. And everyone believed it because of Sputnik. Everyone believed it. And so Kennedy could be this liberal economics. We believe in getting higher wages and civil rights and more, but still be a Cold War. They used to call bread, guns and bread. Get bread, programs for the people to help the people, but also defend the US. Guns and butter, they call it. And that is one of the US ICBMs, a really dangerous liquid-fueled thing called the APUSH. Well, there was a big missile gap. Huge. The United States not only had over 1,000 heavy bombers to bomb the Soviet Union, they had over 500 missiles in Italy and Turkey that could reach most parts of the Soviet Union within 15 minutes. It also had missiles in Japan that could hit most parts of the Eastern Soviet Union, and 1,000 bombers. And the US had these really cumbersome, shockingly dangerous ICBMs, the Titan and the Atlas, just in. Anybody want to guess how many missiles the Soviets had on election day, 1960? Not quite. They had 1 missile, and it took 2 days to fuse. So there was a huge missile gap. I should add, this really disturbed the Soviets. Why would you say there's a missile gap and a bomber gap when the Americans have all the advantages? Must be to prepare their country. In the 1980s, you could buy this plastic model kit of all the US and Soviet ICBMs. So if we're not doing fitness after the exam, we'll be making models of ICBMs. They're about 1.5 years from putting the Minuteman I missiles in Great Falls. The first ones. Soon there'll be 500. Now there's 100 there. The first ever presidential debates would also happen in 1960. And Nixon agreed that he'd wipe the floor with Kennedy, because Kennedy had this reputation. A non-entity. But Kennedy could practice while Nixon was sick. He had a staph infection, lost 20 pounds, was in the hospital. So Nixon looked haggard, tired, weak, and gray. You notice the suits, the popular suits at the time were gray, but on black and white television, it doesn't look like Nixon is kind of blending into the background, while Kennedy wore a dark suit, and you could see him. From then on, politicians to this day, have you noticed? Male politicians especially, but men and women wear dark suits to contrast. And it came from Kennedy. And he looked fit, vigorous, even though he was pumped up with amphetamines. Nixon looked sick, thin, wrong. And Kennedy looked like this energetic president that people wanted for the new decade. And it showed the importance of image. What they actually said, and this is the first debate, it was a pretty good debate. They talked about issues, even though Kennedy did break the rules. We start talking foreign policy, we start talking municipal. Let's go to domestic policy. But in the largest television audience in history, in this debate, they thought Kennedy won. This would be huge. From then on, everybody would focus on the image. Kennedy also had makeup on and things like that, which was seen as unmanly, but they did it in secret. So he looked better. There'd be 3 debates, but the first one's what everybody remembered. And much better than the god-awful debates that are now. So he also had an ad that would be very popular. Do you want to see the ad? You want to see it? You want to see the ad? Who wants to see the Kennedy ad? It's unanimous. I lied. Once again, I lied to you. Do not trust me. You want to see the Kennedy ad? Let's see if you can guess who this ad is for. See if you can guess. It's subtle. I'm not sure yet. We'll wait. We'll hide it. It's actually, it's hard for me to say. It's better than I can president. It's clever. So when the election finally happened, it's actually 3.5 minutes. It's a very long ad. His nephew, who has now become a right-wing Republican in the Trump administration, tried to use that ad when he in his short-term run for president. And all of his relatives were really mad. But back to this. Here is how the election turned out. It was a razor-thin election. Kennedy won a very close election. And there's a belief that there was some shenanigans in Chicago by the Democratic machine there, but also there might have been some shenanigans in Southern Illinois for Republicans, so who knows? But you notice a few electors, even though those states went to Kennedy, except for Oklahoma, but these states went to Kennedy, these electors voted for Harry Byrd because of Kennedy's support for equal rights. The solid South is breaking apart, as you can see. So Kennedy became president, and his program will be the new frontier. Civil rights, he didn't go as far as Truman or Roosevelt. So Medicare or health insurance for the elderly. And that would be a big program. Health insurance for the elderly is so expensive, the health insurance companies couldn't afford it. So that's part of the reason they dropped their opposition. They made a lot of money off of us healthy people, so I included myself in that. And also a massive increase in defense. Unlike the new look, they call it flexible response. And they'll focus on conventional weapons and nuclear weapons. And something new, it's called COIN, or counterinsurgency. Counterinsurgency in these, they call them brush fire wars against communist guerrillas in places like Laos or Malaysia or the Congo or South Vietnam. Kennedy liked this kind of stuff. Well, there's also a raise in the minimum wage, some changes to the tax code, but he was a Keynesian. Did these pass? Not at all. Kennedy turned out to be pretty inept at dealing with Congress. Being elected president is not the same as being president. Very few could do both. Only one thing succeeded. Or all but one failed. Why I said it the other way. The United States would have the largest peacetime defense buildup in its history. Up to that time. Everyone got that? The largest peacetime military buildup under Kennedy. There's this myth that Kennedy was like this somehow peacenik who wouldn't have gone into Vietnam. That's just bad history. It's really bad history. Who knows what would happen? He was assassinated. But wow, did they build up defense. Now, it would be surpassed by Ronald Reagan in '81. It would be surpassed. A bigger peacetime military buildup. If President Trump gets the budget he wants, that might be even a bigger. He wants to increase the military budget by about $150 billion. So we will see where we're at. Once again, this is all happening kind of in great comparisons. So, but Canada. The Bay of Pigs. That's my dark joke. Maybe 1%. So, the Bay of Pigs, April 1961. That would be the planned invasion of Canada. So Ike's plan was to be like Guatemala, which was kind of a disaster, but they lucked out. They would use exiles to invade Canada and trigger a popular uprising. And what did I say? Did I really say invade Canada?
Yeah.
To invade Cuba. Sorry about that. I had no idea I said that. I was looking at people, why are you laughing at invading Cuba? And don't forget, the US had done this before, all the way back to the Spanish-American War and interventions in Big Stick diplomacy. The thought was all the people would rally to these exiles and get rid of Castro. As it turned out, Castro was shockingly popular in Cuba. Even after he became a really totalitarian dictator, he's going to be still really popular amongst most Cubans. Not all. There he is at the front. The invasion went this way, the whole thing fell apart. And immediately the CIA said, it's not going to work. We need the US military. Because it was a total failure. And here's where Kennedy, who actually didn't mind trying to overthrow Castro, but wanted it to be his, didn't like it, said we will not use regular US troops. We'll not use the Navy. The big thing was air power is what they wanted. And so it was a disastrous failure. So you can imagine what Castro was thinking. They invaded, they want to take me out. And the United States would begin an embargo. But also Kennedy, he didn't like it showing. He's very nearsighted, which is the silliness of saying that people with glasses. And that's still that old thing about them would be mangled, which is so silly. But Kennedy humiliated, absolutely humiliated. And he felt he was weak. And he definitely wanted to prove he was tough. He blamed the CIA and actually gave his brother, Robert Kennedy, who was the Attorney General. Wow, what a conflict of interest. But Robert Kennedy, more and more power over covert actions. Oh, you get it? The exploding cigar. Kennedy likes cigars. Cuba's known for its cigars. Get it? Not a bad cookie. Well, ironically, the next month, another peace agreement was, a peace summit was planned in Vienna. Austria then was technically neutral, and it was also a failure. Khrushchev was still mad about the U2 issue. Kennedy was trying to look tough after the Bay of Pigs. Yeah, it's all smiles here, but it was really nasty. And Khrushchev kept hammering Kennedy about the issue of West Berlin. Remember West Berlin, right in the middle of the Soviet occupation zone. Now everyone acknowledges the country of East Germany. He's really upset about that. And Kennedy thought he was trying to browbeat me to evacuate West Berlin. And it really came out thinking we're going to have more war. This would also help increase defense spending. Almost a good thing. And the reason why Khrushchev was mad, it was called the brain drain in Berlin. There was no dividing line between East and West Berlin. And anybody could cross over back and forth. And what was happening were people from all over behind the Iron Curtain. So from Poland or Czechoslovakia or inside East Germany would go over to the East Berlin, cross over to the West, and stay. Because they were becoming disillusioned with the shortages and the problems in the Eastern Bloc. And they called it the brain drain. And it was becoming a real problem. Khrushchev wanted something done about this. And the US refused. I should add, you're going to get a lot of people who live in the Western section. They would go across to the East and get cheaper apartments, just commute. Or like retired in the West, live on your pension and live in the East. So families were divided. What became the solution? If Kennedy's not going to do anything, the East will do it. In August 1961, the Berlin Wall popped up overnight. Now, clearly, Khrushchev was partially behind this, but it was done by East Germans. That East German soldier with the sunglasses is going to be filmed and his picture taken, film on the TV, everything. That guy will become internationally known for those sunglasses. But barbed wire, quick little cinder block fence, and then a better reinforced cement wall would go up and would totally divide and isolate West Berlin. And here you can see people from the west looking over to the east. It happened overnight. Soon they would put up a 100-foot killing zone, landmines, attack dogs. Anybody who would try to get over would be risking their life. You can still cross, but only at designated checkpoints. And that is, I know exactly what's happening there. Holding his son up because her grandparents were on the other side. The wall went up, and if you were on the other side, you're stuck. So there were families, including married couples, that were divided forever because of this. Unless one could get over. That's an East German Guard making a break for it in 1979, kind of a famous picture. And this is a real sign of Soviet desperation. In the West, they took it as Soviet aggression. It wasn't. If you have to keep the wall, keep a wall up to keep the people in, you got real problems. There are real problems that Khrushchev was trying to address, probably incorrectly, but it actually calmed the situation down. There would be a few big-time confrontations, but for the most part, the threat of war actually dropped because of the wall, even though if you lived in the western section, it was pretty harrowing. You would be surrounded by wall and then barbed wire and wall all the way around, so you're literally in this little island. And that is a confrontation at the U.S. Army checkpoint that was codenamed Checkpoint Charlie. Now there's a great museum right there. So Alec, who was here the first semester, his dad grew up right near the Tempelhof region, right here. And his dad told me that when the wall was still up, they would go climb on each other's shoulders and yell insults at the East German guards and throw things at them until they pointed their guns at them. That's insane. And I told Alec this, and he said, oh, he would never do it. Okay, I just told you a secret about your dad. Of course he did it, but the next year, Kennedy would go to Berlin and give one of his most famous speeches, because the United States really wanted to show to the rest of Western Europe, we will defend you from, if this really is Soviet aggression, we will defend not just Western Europe, but West Berlin. And if that's attacked, we'll defend it like we're defending the United States. So he wanted to say, I'm one of you. So he would say that I am a Berliner. I'm a citizen of Berlin. And he wanted to say it in German. He actually talked to the mayor of Berlin, Willy Brandt, and got it all down. And here it is, phonetically spelled on his own. He had 3x5 cards. And he goes through them for a speech. Ich bin ein Berliner. So he could say it phonetically correct, which meant it's casual. I'm a citizen of Berlin. He said that twice. The crowd went nuts. Now, of course, some of you might know that a Berliner is also a jelly donut. And so that became the joke that Kennedy screwed up, and he actually said, I'm a jelly donut, and the people of Berlin laughed at him. Now, that is not true. That is a myth. Everyone knew what he was saying, but it is still pretty predominant. I hear people say it all the time. And the first time I was in Berlin, I went into a little shop, and I found a sticker of a jelly donut saying, Ich bin ein Berliner. So I, of course, had to buy the Ich bin ein Berliner jelly donut sticker. Pretty cool. It was a €150. Pretty neat, huh? Are you jealous? The answer is yes. I gotta stick this up when I retire. They don't use decimal, or a period with the decimal, they use a comma. See? Tricks of Germany. Should we go to Germany? That was the day I bought this the day I got kidnapped by Dutch soccer fans. I heard a way to say it is hijacked. Maybe I'll tell you that story after the exam. That was a day. Whew. Well, this would lead to kind of a stalemate over the Berlin Wall. And crisis would go down, even though in '83, the Soviets nearly blew the world up. And you can see him constructing the main wall. Here you see the killing ground behind it. Now that it's all been totally reconstructed, there's not very much of the wall left. Here are tourists in West Berlin taking a picture from the wall. The whole west side of the wall is going to be covered with graffiti. As luck would have it, I have 2 pieces of the wall that I bought at the original Berliner Wall Museum. 2 pieces, and we know they're true because it says their certificate. Pretty cool, huh? One, you can actually see some of the graffiti. See a little bit on this. Now, I know what you're saying. You give any chunk of cement and say that's a Berlin Wall, right? No, you can't, because it says certificate of. It says certificate. Do you want to see the piece of the wall? Can I trust you? Don't eat this. Yeah, there's only a few hundred feet of the wall left. The actual wall museum is really cool. It's really neat. So while this is going on, through the Attorney General's office, which is just shockingly illegal. We wouldn't find out about this in the US for 15 years. Operation Mongoose, being run by Robert Kennedy, RFK, the Attorney General. And it was a plan to assassinate Cuba. And this was a covert operation with the CIA, but they also talked to mobsters. And this is the Algonquin meeting, so that's a bunch of people from the five families, mafia men, who were mad at Castro for kicking out the casinos. And the plan was either to, if they get a hitman, hire someone to do it, or do like the dirty tricks like have get an exploding cigar or something like that. Now, they all failed, kind of comically failed. But Castro knew they're trying to kill him. Think about it. Castro knows they're trying to kill him. They've invaded once. And Khrushchev knows the United States has more nuclear weapons. Both Castro and Khrushchev feel incredibly weak. Last one, very good. The original Berliner Mauerstein wall. And so to deter American attack, they wanted to put missiles in Cuba to deter attack on both the Soviet Union and Cuba. Because they're trying to kill Castro and they've already invaded once. And why is the US doing this massive arms buildup? And their buddies. Mad Magazine has an exploding cigar cartoon in 1963. They had no idea about mongoose. What I'm telling you, like Iran and Guatemala, the people did not know in the US until 76, mongoose in 77. That's leading to the Cuban Missile Crisis. October 14th through October 28th of 1962. And this is the closest that the world came to nuclear war public. Okay, and privately, some things happened. But the closest we're going to come to nuclear war public that people knew about the crisis. In 79, we were 3 minutes away from destruction of the world. I was asleep. So you can't blame me. I will tell you that story. It's kind of amazing. But this kind of shows the folly of nuclear war. It's one of the more famous cartoons. And it shows the problem of building up nuclear weapons to deter other people from attack. Kennedy, Khrushchev. They're sitting on hydrogen bombs. Kennedy's finger on the trigger. You get the point on that. And they're arm wrestling over Cold War issues. So, on the edge of nuclear war, finger on the trigger, arm wrestling about these other issues. But what happens if somebody wins? Let's say Kennedy wins. What happens? Where does his arm go? On the trigger. What do you win in this thing? Except destruction of the world. So it's a good cartoon to show the folly of all of this. And a U-2 illegally flying over Cuba, this is all illegal, found pictures. These are medium range, intermediate range ballistic missiles that the Soviets were constructing. And their longest range ones could reach almost all the United States. It could be in Washington, D.C. in about 9 minutes. And the thing is, the U.S. had missiles in Turkey and Italy. The Soviets had nothing comparable. But no American president politically could allow this. Remember the Truman Doctrine, tough on communism? So Kennedy immediately decided we have to get him out. This is politically intolerable. So for the next week, they discuss options. Could you attack? But if they attack, would the Germans counterattack in Berlin and lead to World War III there? Diplomacy is too slow. He was even meeting at this time with the Soviet foreign minister, but also not strong enough. Kennedy wanted to look tough. And these are actually pictures from that era. 2 US A-4 fighter or attack planes and US Marines practicing, training. So what did they decide? A blockade is an act of war, but they called it a quarantine. And they would stop any Soviet ships, at first 200, but eventually about 100 miles for missile parts. Here is a Soviet ship nearing that line, freighters. So the idea being, we won't go to full-scale war. We're calling it a quarantine, but it's really confrontation. So they decide to do that. They sent the ships and patrol planes out for the US Navy. And then Kennedy announced that everybody knew the Cuban Missile Crisis. Everyone knew it on October 22nd. He announced it on television. The link didn't work, but there he is announcing it. And told everybody, prepare for war. It might happen. And people believe that for the next week, this could be our last night. They started stockpiling food, knowing where the local shelters were. This is all over the Western world, Australia, Japan, Canada, United States. And it caused mass panic. Those are people shopping, grabbing whatever food they can. Here are people watching Kennedy. That's one of the fallout shelter signs. There's still a few up in Helena. Like there's one right by the city hall for fallout shelters. Capitol with a fallout shelter in the basement. And that's pamphlet to show you can turn your backyard into a fallout shelter by digging a hole and putting a door over it, staying there for 2 weeks. Sounds awesome, doesn't it? I had that very pamphlet. But the panic went everywhere, as you can see from this picture. It was absolute chaos. And okay, any excuse to show the cats on the screen, I'm going to take, right? I don't know if that's real, but it's awesome. October 24th, the first Soviet ships arrived, and it looked like they were going to try to run the blockade, but they stopped. And that turned into a stalemate. And now 5 days of frantic negotiations that literally they had to do like radio broadcasts over Radio Moscow, all kinds of secret communications. There was no direct line. It almost failed, but finally on the morning of the 28th, a deal was made. So, stalemate, 100 miles from Cuba, and a deal was made. And basically the deal was this. They tried to save face for both. The US agreed not to invade Cuba. Soviets removed their missiles. But you can imagine what Kennedy's very rapidly anti-communist conservative opponents are going to say, this is another Munich. And in secret, the US also agreed to remove those missiles from Turkey and Italy, but we're going to remove them anyways because they're obsolete and really dangerous. We didn't need them anymore. Kennedy used to talk about these new Minuteman missiles, and he called it his ace in the hole. Poker turn, your whole card is an ace. I have the Minuteman. So the Cuban Missile Crisis would end as close as people publicly knew. After the test, I got to tell you a couple stories about this because it was unreal what happened and how close it came. But we pulled back from the brink, and two big things will come out of this. A limited test ban about open. Both sides agreed to limit and stop the open atmospheric test. And they put up a telegraph line to connect the Kremlin and the White House so they could communicate more directly. People think it's a phone. There's actually a telegraph line. It's still there as an emergency just in case. Let's get the beast of nuclear war. Clever cartoon. Kennedy would be really popular after this, but within a year's popularity, it's going to be tanked. And he's going to be really worried about re-election. At the same time, Khrushchev is going to be ousted from power. They didn't kill him, but he's going to be in prison. Actually, kind of a luxury in his dacha outside of Moscow. But this is ironically going to be the series of steps that will lead to the end of the Cold War. The Soviets vowed to never be humiliated like that again. And soon they're going to spend 50% of their economy, of their entire net worth and production on military. And it's unsustainable. And that's going to eventually lead to the Soviet economic collapse of the early 1980s. And that will lead directly to the end of the Cold War. And you can argue this would be the beginning of the end of the Soviets, and a terrible mistake by the Soviets. By building these weapons, they just wasted through all their money. And so there's going to be shortages of food and basic consumer items. And the West looked pretty good. If you know anything about the Soviet Union of the early 1980s, a pair of Levi's was worth its weight in gold. You've probably heard a little bit about that. Literally worth its weight of gold in Russia. the civil rights movement. Also, remember I talked about those three big issues that happened? Well, it did not end Jim Crow laws. It did not end the grandfather's laws. So two big things will happen in the civil rights movement. First, a series of brave, educated, determined young men and women who began sit-ins in segregated diners, restaurants, hotels, etc., to show the injustice of the law as a measure of civil disobedience. So they're going to be brutalized. They won't be arrested because remember what happened to Rosa Parks. But here they are at lunch counters being attacked, humiliated. And the point is, it's a morality play. Good versus evil. Who's good? Who is just? Those brave young men and women integrated at this lunch counter, or those attacking them? That is an important message. It takes a lot of courage to do that. This lunch counter, it's here and here. It's at Woolworths in North Carolina. It's in the Smithsonian Museum of American History. 2 weeks ago, the Trump administration ordered it taken out. So that's where we're at right now. We'll see what happens. My guess is they'll forget, but who knows? And the Freedom Riders were the other one. Yeah, I'm just for history. That's not shocking news to you. At least I think it's shocking. Another one's called Freedom Riders. Same deal. Integrate buses, but also to register voters to go through the South and challenge Plessy versus Ferguson. Because remember, Brown versus Topeka Board of Education was only about buses. The Montgomery bus boycott was only about local buses, not interstate buses. And so they would ride through. And there would be a number of episodes where they would be attacked, members would be jailed. Most famously outside of Birmingham, Alabama, with the state police, we call the Highway Patrol in Montana. It's called the state police in Alabama, Mississippi. They stopped the bus riders and basically stopped them, held them there, and allowed protesters and thugs to firebomb. So this is right before it happened. That it's firebomb. That's the bus after. Most of them survived, but a few would be arrested and horribly hurt. And then the state police waded into the Freedom Riders and beat the hell out of them. As you can see here, that's John L. Lewis, who would be a leader of a group called SNCC, but eventually become a 15-term member of the House of Representatives from Georgia. And a real symbol of the civil rights movement. He had to resign a few years ago because he passed away a couple of years. But it's a morality play, but it takes guts. Take this. But King and other leaders of the civil rights movement were worried if they fought back, that would give the excuse to it. I think you might guess where this is going. This is how during the time of the Warren Code. The Warren Code really started pushing more and more laws, even the 14th Amendment, which guaranteed civil rights. Remember, the most important amendment of the United States Constitution. 3 big court cases, Engel versus Vitale, which said no required school prayer in public schools. You can pray. You just can't be forced to pray. They would do, it was really common to have almost always Protestant Christian prayers over the loudspeaker. You can pray, you just can't be forced on it. And that's right now being challenged. My guess is it's probably good, but we'll see. And I want to bring back Druid prayers. I need some sacrifice of goats in the classroom. But also, I'm only picking 3 cases. There's a lot of them. I'm picking 3. Griswold versus Connecticut might be one of the most important. Using the 4th Amendment, it says that all Americans are guaranteed privacy rights. The whole thing was about privacy right for birth control. But this is going to be one of the most important decisions for women's rights, because it's saying that men and women have equal privacy rights. This will become crucial for such rulings down the road for abortion rights, or for that matter, especially workers' rights and equality in education. Griswold is huge. There are a couple court cases that are winding their way right now through the 9th District Court to overturn that. The other one is Miranda versus Arizona. And that is the one that would guarantee the 5th due process for all people accused of a crime. You've all heard the Miranda rules. You have the right to remain silent. That's where it comes from. They don't have to say it, but police departments almost immediately after this happened, start giving little 3x5 cards with that written on it. So they would make sure they would say it and just become ingrained. Now, if you watch any movie or television show, they always say that. That came from the Miranda decision. But he's going to be bitterly attacked by conservatives. As you can see from this, and this is not the actual one from Miles City, but that has another version of that was in my hometown growing up. Long after Warren had died, it was still up, just there on Haynes Avenue. But in 1963, on the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, civil rights leaders and labor unions organized the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And this was to push Kennedy to fight for equal rights, a civil rights law to get rid of Jim Crow. But it was also for economic justice, which is much more difficult than getting rid of Jim Crow. Here's 100,000 people who were there, the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. There'd be 13 speakers. Martin Luther King would give one of his most famous speeches. And it was a speech he had given many times, but never with this big of an audience. And their leaders meeting Kennedy, Kennedy was furious and begged them not to do it. Because this march brought a highlight to Kennedy's inaction about civil rights. So it was actually an embarrassment. Here, literally right after there's Martin Luther King, Walter Reuther, I'm sorry, that's this is Walter Reuther right there, head of the United Auto Workers. Right, Wilkins, that's John L. Lewis right there, the guy I showed you earlier. He spoke there really nervous. He got a little bit of a stutter, and he gave a great speech. I'm pretty impressed with him. So there'd be a massive conservative backlash to this. This was a very common billboard all over the United States claiming Martin Luther King was a communist. He was not a communist. He was a moderate socialist, without a doubt. This is actually a seminary school, but they say it's communist training school. And when I was a little kid, this was still outside of Omaha, Nebraska, where my grandma and grandpa lived. So it wasn't this exact one, but it's one I still remember that. And asking my mom about it, was really upset about that song. But most Americans, and I wish it wasn't by color of skin, but it was by color of skin, very much disapproved of the March on Washington. This was a Gallup poll. Now the numbers, grain of salt by all polls, but it's pretty overwhelming, over 60% unfair. I should add, if they add polling of whites, Martin Luther King had usually 80% unfair, all the way to the end of his life. And there were a lot of people who said he had it coming, which I'll talk a little bit about tomorrow. Jump right here. South Vietnam, last thing for today, I promise. Kennedy was making South Vietnam very important because he wanted a victory in the Cold War. And he was committing more and more money for arms, but also advisors. And advisors were groups like Special Forces, they wore Green Berets, those Green Berets, and others training, but also American helicopter pilots and bombers. And the US Navy was supporting them. And they were getting involved in combat, even though they were technically advisors. When Kennedy took office, there was 1,000 advisors. When Kennedy was assassinated, there were 18,000 advisors. Kennedy was making South Vietnam important. His last speech he ever gave the morning he was assassinated was bragging about the nuclear weapons in Montana and how they're doing well in South Vietnam. And he lied. They were not doing well in South Vietnam. All right. If anyone's having trouble logging into AP Classroom, please see me real quick. Everyone else, clear out. If you want me, any parts I don't get, if you want to do like a lunch, I will consider it. I don't mind helping you. I do feel a little guilty I didn't quite get done. Part of it was my fault. Part of it is, without doubt, intervention. But part of it was my fault. So I will help you if you want it. If anyone has trouble getting AP Classroom, please see me. I'll give you a paper copy. Give me another day.
Right, yeah, so I just like, our next best day for math test. Did you see my team's chat that it was for both me and Izzy or just Izzy?
I did see it.
Okay,
You got it.
thank you.
And they were dramatic.
They were, it was a dramatic look.
Yeah.
Mhm, yeah, did you hear us yelling?
I didn't know you guys yelling.
Fire! Just all the books that we use our buckets, it's so funny.
Did you just walk into the crowd?
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
I'm impressed. Good one. Yes, but you like if you think of one child. No, thank you. It's upstairs.
Oh, this was in front.
I knew, yeah, I got to the urban hospital. I was talking to her and, his boss, they're talking about making this awesome.
So I can't believe I missed the mention of Guatemala.
Sorry.
I was taking that AP bio.
Yeah, I know 80 miles. I gave.
Oh my God.
It's a big problem for you. I hope you with
The way.
Oh, you couldn't name the internet. I didn't. Now, is that right? But it's there. I didn't name, I just. I got.
Why is someone saying about that?
Yeah.
Why, yeah.
Oh, no, it's different. I think,
No.
No, I didn't put him on stage.
He was like,
I would be. Oh, God.
Everybody, take out your notes. We're behind in this class. It's normal. So let's get going. Let's get going, people. I'm gonna say this once, but I'm gonna mean it. We're burning daylight. Let's go. Not enough.